Hey guys, today we'll be talking about the cardiac action potential. Why so it is separately mentioned cardiac action potential? Does it have any differences from the normal action potential that is performed by all the skeletal muscles and the smooth muscles? Yes, there are some differences. There is some abnormality. There is some speciality in this cardiac action potential. Now, let us see firstly how to define this cardiac action potential. The cardiac action potential is usually defined as a prolonged and long refractory period. So, action potential of a cardiac muscle fiber is prolonged and will be having the long refractory period. So, whenever you see when you record an action potential from the cardiac muscle fiber, you will find it unusually very long. So it is so long, like it will be dividing into the 5 phases. Okay, so action potential recorded from a single cardiac muscle fiber is usually very long and is divided into the 5 phases. So, whenever you give a stimulus to this cardiac muscle fiber, you'll initially find a spike. After the spike, it remains in depolarization for about 0.2 seconds. After that, it forms a plateau and then it causes abrupt repolarization. Causes the abrupt repolarization. So, what is this plateau? What is the importance of this is the presence of this plateau phase, it explains the 15 times longer contraction time when compared to the skeletal muscle. Okay, so the presence of this phase explains 15 times longer contraction time compared to the skeletal muscle. So how does this actually look like is a spike remains in depolarization for 0.2 seconds, a plateau, and abrupt repolarization, and finally comes back to the resting membrane potential. Okay, this is how you see as cardiac action potential. Okay, now as I've told that this is usually very long and will be having 5 phases, let us see each of these phases in detail and also its ionic basis and its ionic basis. Okay, now yeah, see, if you see this graph which is plotted uh, between the time and the membrane potential, so taking the x-axis with the time expressed in milliseconds and the membrane potential on the y-axis expressed in the millivolts. Okay, now I've told you the 5 phases. The 5 phases would be phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 and phase 4. Okay, now first one is the phase 1. This phase 0 or also called the upstroke. It is characterized by the rapid depolarization. So the first one becomes rapid depolarization plus you got an overshoot. Okay, you got an overshoot. So the phase 0 is characterized by the rapid depolarization and will be having a overshoot, and this amplitude will be reaching the level like plus 20 or plus 30 millivolts. Okay, the amplitude of potential will reach plus 20 plus 30 millivolts. Now what is the ionic basis that causes this depolarization? So whenever you stimulate this cardiac muscle fiber, it immediately rapidly opens the sodium voltage gated sodium channels. This voltage gated sodium channels opening causes the sodium influx. So sodium influx will increases this membrane potential. So in this way of increasing at the level of minus 30 minus 40, what happens is calcium channels also open and causes the calcium influx. Okay, it causes the calcium influx. This is the ionic basis of the depolarization. Okay, now coming to the second one, that is a phase 1. The rapid depolarization is followed by a very short-lived slight initial repolarization. Here the membrane potential amplitude have fallen from plus 20 to minus 10 millivolts. Okay, now what have caused this repolarization is, so in this all, just remember that the events happening in a particular phase is completely opposite to the events happening in the previous phase. So in the previous phase, what happened? Sodium channels opened, but here the sodium channels have closed. Initial rapid repolarization is caused by closure of the sodium channels and opening of the potassium channels and causing the potassium efflux This is the ionic basis of the phase 1. Now coming to the phase 2. Phase 2 is also called the plateau. So in this plateau, the cardiac muscle fiber is still present in its depolarized state. The membrane potential further falls from -10 to -40, -10 to -40, and this will be lasting for about 100 to 200 milliseconds. 100 to 200 milliseconds. So this phase, I have already told you, will explains the 15 times. I'm really very sorry. It explains the 15 times longer contraction time when compared to the skeletal muscle. Now, what is the ionic basis for this plateau is this very slow repolarization is happening because of the calcium influx and the potassium channels have been closed. I have already told events happening in the particular phase will be opposite to that of the previous. In the previous phase, what happened? Potassium channels closed. Here, open. So here what happened? The potassium has closed. So this decreased potassium efflux combined with the increased calcium influx has caused the plateau. Okay, has caused the plateau. Now coming to the phase 3, that is repolarization. This repolarization will be caused by the closing of the calcium channels. See, again opposite. Here calcium channels have opened, here calcium channels have closed. Okay, the calcium channels have closed and opening of the two types of potassium channels that decreases the potassium within the cardiac muscle fiber. Now this causes complete repolarization and the membrane potential falls to the resting membrane potential, and this will be lasting for about 50 milliseconds. Now coming to the phase 4. The phase 4 is nothing but the resting membrane potential, which it reaches the -90 millivolts. Okay, it reaches -90 millivolts. So here what happened is the potential has reached the resting membrane potential, but the resting ionic composition can be restored by the sodium potassium ATPase. Hope you got my point. Reaching this resting membrane potential does not bring the resting ionic composition also. The resting ionic composition is brought by the sodium potassium ATPase. Okay, sodium potassium ATPase. This is all about the phases of the cardiac action potential. Hope you got my point. And now let us talk about the duration of this action potential. So how long did it has take? So the duration is 250 milliseconds if the heartbeat is 75 times per minute. So as the heartbeat keeps on increasing, this duration will be decreasing. Like for example, it might become 150 milliseconds if the heart rate is like 200 beats per minute. Okay, this is the duration of the cardiac action potential. Okay, so whenever you see this this middle part, so this is all the absolute refractory period. This is the absolute refractory period. So what is this absolute refractory period? During this phase, if you apply any more stimulus, it do not respond, it do not give any other action potential. Okay, that is the reason why this cardiac action potential was simply told like it is prolonged and will be having long refractory period. Okay guys, thank you for watching my video. If you found it useful, please do share it with